Good afternoon, or good morning if you are far to the west. I'm Christoph Neumann. We are here at the Orient Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome everybody here in our auditory and of course online. We are now, that is in the framework of an ongoing internal workshop on Mosque-Politics, remapping Turkish power and religious policies in the Western Balkans. We are here to listen to two public papers by Nathalie Clayer and Rebecca Bryant, whom I'm not going to introduce. I leave that to the co-organizer of this workshop, Kerem Öktem, from our institute and from the University Ca' Foscari in Venice. And I begin with thanks to everybody who has made this possible, and especially to the Southeast Europe Association in Munich, who, and this association is our cooperation partner. I have been asked, for those who are perhaps more interested in Southeast European and Balkan matters than in Turkish matters and may happen not to know about us, very few words on our institute. It's called the Orient Institute, something that goes back to the year 1961 when an Orient Institute was founded in Beirut, a German research institute that later on, due to civil war in Lebanon, took sort of refuge in Istanbul. And from that taking refuge, there developed first a branch institute in Istanbul, and then later this institute that I'm so fortunate to be the director of. This Orient Institute is, or the two Orient Institutes belong to the 11 institutes under the umbrella of the German Federal Foundation, Max Weber Stiftung, Max Weber Foundation. All these 11 institutions are research institutions on humanities, very often history, or with a broader approach like ours, outside of Germany, in India, in Japan, but of course also in Europe, in Rome, in Paris, in London, in Warsaw, in Eastern Europe, plus, of course, in the United States of America. At our institute, we do history, but not exclusively. We have a very strong branch in musicology. We are doing science, technology, and society studies. We are studying literature. We are studying the anthropology and history of religion, and quite a lot of other things as well. And in this interdisciplinary framework, we are also sometimes interested in political sciences. One thing that is central to our effort is that we are doing entanglements, that we are interested in entanglements, both to Iran and to Europe, both Latin Europe and the former Ottoman Europe. And of course, the Balkan is former Ottoman Europe. And in doing so, we have programs with scholarships, we have people doing projects here, we have a publication series, quite some outreach. And with that, I would just like to invite you to take a look at on our website. If you are listening, you already know where it is. And with this, I would like to give the word and the floor to Kerem Öktem, who is going to introduce our speakers. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Christoph. And oh, I'm sorry. This is Welcome to the Orient Institute Istanbul to this event in cooperation with the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft. My name is Kerem Öktem. It's already been mentioned. I'm an associate professor of politics and international relations at Ca' Foscari University in Venice and a senior research associate at this institute. We are here today to discuss the discursive and material effects of the construction of large representative mosques in the Balkans and Turkey, of large infrastructures, religious infrastructures. The Balkans are, of course, a great starting point or a great case study, if you so will, to discuss this Turkish policy. I mean, when you think of the historic cityscapes of cities like Sarajevo, Prizren, Skopje, they are very much dominated by 15th, 16th century mosques, khans, hammams, imarets of the Ottoman era. Mosques in the Balkans were built and rebuilt, of course, also after the end of the Ottoman Empire in both Yugoslavias, in interwar Albania, and in other countries of the region. Mosque building continued after the destruction of Yugoslavia, bringing in the new transnational authors, of course, first from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, and for quite a time now, Turkey has been the leading country in both the restoration of Ottoman mosques and the building of grand-style neo or new Ottoman mosques in city centers, particularly in, Tirana now, but soon also in Pristina and other cities. Turkey's presence in the Balkans is, of course, very complex because it is both the inheritor of the Ottoman Empire and a regional power which seeks to project power and influence in the Balkans. Some critics think of it as a third party actor that undermines the region's European orientation. So in this context, I believe that looking at mosques, their construction, their destruction and reconstruction promises important insights. Insights on, and questions on religion, power, on politics. And just to mention a few questions which we will probably be discussing today, to what extent can these Ottoman mosques in the Balkans, the new ones, be understood as projects of Turkish domination or neo-imperialism or neo-Ottomanism? What do people on the ground think about these new mosques, new projects? Who supports them? Who opposes them and why? Who is empowered by them? Who is marginalized? What are the opposing national identity projects and geostrategic worldviews that clash in the mosque debate? And how do politicians engage with them? And maybe also a third question, why do we ask these questions about the impact of mosques, but rarely about Catholic or Orthodox cathedrals? Is this because of Eurocentric or European imperial imaginaries that see mosques as reminders of an un-European, a traumatic past that needs to be transcended? To explore some of these questions, and probably many more, which I haven't mentioned, we have two leading scholars with us today, and both have dedicated their work both thematically on the theme we're talking about today, but also on the region, Southeast Europe and the Balkans. Professor Nathalie Clayer and Professor Rebecca Bryant. Welcome to both of you. I will first introduce Professor Clayer, who will examine the post-Ottoman Balkans and discuss how mosque construction in interwar Albania and today was mobilized to consolidate both internal politics and foreign relations. She'll talk about 40 minutes and then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for your questions, for discussion. And if you're joining us online, you're very welcome to pose your questions in the chat and we will read them out here. And then in the second part, I will introduce Professor Bryant, who will explore the more recent or return actor Turkey engaging in fraternal domination. But let me start with a few words about Nathalie Clayer, who of course does not need an introduction at all, but Professor Clayer is a director of research at the École des Hautes Études des Sciences Sociales in Paris, and she has conducted research across a very wide range of fields in Ottoman studies, the Balkans, Islam, and Sufism. Her early work focused on the history of Muslim mystical brotherhoods in the Balkans and the Empire, and over the years her research has expanded to encompass Albanian Islam and questions of identity and the formation of Albanian nationalism. Her more recent work explores the transition from empire to nation state, particularly through the lens of political and religious transformations in late Ottoman and interwar Albania. She also engages in comparative research on religious pluralism in early Republican Turkey and examines broader questions of reform, state power, and social mobilization. There are two field-defining books, particularly for our research questions here today. Le Nouvel Islam Balkanique, 2001, which she co-edited with Xavier Bugarel, and which was published in English only 15 years later, I think, as Europe's Balkan Muslims, A New History, which itself was building up of an earlier book, Les Musulmans du Sud-Est-Europe dans la période post-Ottoman by Alexandre Popovic, and both of these books have been field-defining in the sense of, well, both of the research questions we're tackling today and also in terms of my access to the field. Today she will speak about studying the construction of mosques, stakes, actors, spaces, and materialities, the example of interwar Albania. These ideas were first explored in a paper on the construction of mosques in Albania between 1920 and 39, but today she will go through a much larger historical perspective, bringing us to today. So Nathalie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christophe, for the introduction, and Kerem. And thank you for the invitation to present this former research, let's say, rethought, and in order also to look at more recent events. So it's indeed Kerem who asked me to present, in fact, the results of this research that I did many years ago on the building of mosques in interwar Albania, knowing that, in fact, at that time, if I'm not wrong, in southeastern Europe, no mosque, so except in Albania and except also the Mosque of Zagreb, which was built at the beginning of the 40s, no mosques were built. And I think that in Turkey also it was the case, and in Turkey, at that time, even symbolically, very symbolically, Hagia Sophia was turned into a museum. So, but nevertheless, working on the Islam in interwar Albania, in the archives in Tirana, I found many information about the building of mosque. Here you have a map of this mosque. Maybe there were also other mosques. In fact, just during the period after the First World War, very often the requests to the Islamic institutions concerned liberation of mosques, because the mosques were used by troops, for example, the rebuilding or the building, sometimes also the control. But very interesting, in 1927, one of the persons very important in these official Islamic institutions, Salih Vucitern, who was the responsible of the Vakıf, proposed to close down mosques that were not useful. So in a way to rationalize the network of mosques in the country. It's true also that the Islamic institutions at that time had financial problems, also because some of the WACs were in bad conditions, or that sometimes the lands, for example, that were the source of income for the religious institutions remained outside of the country, and so the incomes could not come in order to make these institutions function. In this first phase, we see so very often these requests coming from the bottom up. The populations or sometimes committees ask for, or local religious authorities ask for the building or the rebuilding of a mosque. But in 28, so let's say with the transformation of the country as a monarchy, things changed. But in order to today to understand more the mechanisms and the methods that I think we have to adopt in order to analyze the building of mosques, I will, or already in this study, I took in fact 3 examples. Here you have in black on the map. So one mosque in Tirana, the new capital, one in Durrës, the main port of the country, and one in another port in the south of the country, Saranda. Here you have this first, the new mosque of, I don't know if I can show, maybe with this? No, I don't know. Okay. On your left, you have the new mosque in Tirana. So you see that it was built at the outskirts of the city. So Tirana, you have to know that it was a small city with maybe 10,000 inhabitants, and that it was chosen as the capital of the country only at the beginning of the 1920s. So then it developed, and the need of mosques rose. And here on the right, I put some two photos of the traditional, let's say, traditional mosque of Tirana from the 18th or 19th century, or 17th maybe century. And here this new mosque, you see the style, very, very modern. Okay. The second mosque is the mosque of Durrës. Here again, with a very modern style. And a very big mosque. The other one was very big. So compared to the one of today, not so big, but compared to the mosque of to the existing mosque, it was big. And the third one in Saranda, it's interesting because you will see that one stake was to mark, in fact, the landscape. And so Saranda was a small port in the south of the city with maybe only 800 inhabitants in 1912. and up to 2000 before the Second World War, because it was made as an important, relatively important port and city in the vicinity of Greece. Okay, so now here we have, I tried to gather all the most important characteristic of the building process of this mosque, as far as the documentation, of course, gave me information. So, and I put the five, so no, in fact, I added times to my subtitle. So actors, times, or process and temporality, spaces, symbolism and discourses, and materiality. And doing this, we see, for example, concerning the actors, that the three cases are very different, because the first one, the Mosque of Durrës, was built because at the beginning of the will of Salih Vučićern, the director of the FCAF. So it means that it came from the head of the Islamic official institutions. Whereas in the case of Sarand, it came from the believers who were mainly refugees coming from Greece. And in Tirana, in fact, the capital, it was also one, in fact, in my paper, it's not in my paper, I found this recently, a figure, maybe who was a kind of Rasputin of the king Zog, and the population of this new quarter at the outskirts of the city. But then I have put these plus signs because, in fact, we see that if at the beginning there are some actors, very often there is a recuperation by other actors. So, for example, the Besa group, or the newspaper Besa, an important pressure group close to the king, but also the Muslim youth organization in the case of Durrës. In the case of Sarand, it's the Islamic community, but also the prefect and the government, who had not always the same position concerning the building of the mosque, and even the king's family, because in the end, this mosque was financed by one of the sisters of King Zog. Just to remind you that Albania was like as Turkey, so like Turkey, but nevertheless, we see here that the king and his family played an important role in the building of some of these mosques, which was not obvious when I began this research, but okay. And then in the case of Tirana, it's the Islamic institutions, and again the Besa newspaper, who used the building of this mosque by believers in order to say we have to build mosques, etc. Of course, so the context is also the context. We are at the end of the 20s and beginning of the 30s. It means that it's a period of economic crisis in Albania, like in other countries, and so that in fact the Islamic institutions and even the state have not the financial means in order to build mosques. Now, times, so again, it's not exactly the same. In Tirana, I would say that, in Durrës, excuse me, I would say that the time of the project is also, coincides with the time of the reorganization of the Islamic community after 1928-29. And also the consolidation of the kingdom, especially vis-à-vis Europe and Italy. Whereas in Sarand, at the beginning, it's more the post-war period, and the time also of the installation of refugees. But again, we have also, like in Durrës, the time of the state formation. Here in Tirana, we have more the time of the development of the capital city. Spaces, so Durrës as a port, it means as the Albanian gate. So here we have, because compared to today, where if we are interested to especially the action of Turkish actors, and then we have international and transnational dynamics. At that time, it's more so national or local dynamics, but not exactly, because here in this case, so Salih Vučićan is very clear, saying that it's important to build this mosque because Durrës is the gate where the foreigners enter, come in or come out from the country. So symbolically, it's very important, and we have also, in the case of Sarand, but a bit different, because it's in order to nationalize the border zone vis-à-vis Greece. And another thing, we are speaking today of big mosques, but the issue of big mosque, in fact, it was already the issue at that time, because it's written that, for example, the Mosque of Durrës has to be big because it has to compete with the big churches that were already in the city, but also because it has to be a mosque for the city, not for a quarter. So we are in another dimension, and also so it's for a city, and also in order to welcome religious but also national events. So the size has to do with something which is more national. So in the case of Sarand, you see it's a bit different. And in the case of Tirana, it's the issue of land. So when we speak about space, the land where the mosque will be built is very often very important. It has also to do with materiality. It's for a new quarter, but in a way, in the recuperation, the Islamic official institutions are saying that it's also, or that there is a need for the capital city. So symbolism, So very important is the idea of modernity of Islam. And so it's in the case of, especially of Durrës, and a bit also in Tirana, not so much in Sarand. The European identity also, the dignity vis-à-vis other religions, and also the association with the king, because the mosque was supposed to be to take the name of the king. So the materiality is very important. Here, in the case of Durrës, there is the cupola and two minarets. So we are, if we are in the way to the present situation, the size, the material, so in the insistence on the use of concrete is also very important, and the style. So we can see that today it's not anymore the so modern style that is put forward. Okay, I will now, maybe in order to be quicker, So, as I said, despite the official laicity and despite the financial crisis, so we have the building of mosque, but the configurations are very important. So the local configurations or the relation to the national configuration is very important. Sometimes, so we have the need of the believers, sometimes the legitimacy of the Albanian state in Europe, despite the Muslim majority, the prestige vis-à-vis the non-Muslim communities, the national, also the national affirmation vis-à-vis Greece, the building of the prestige of the king and the dynasty, the size, as I said, not only for a Jamaat, but for national meetings, and also so the limitation of the financial and maybe not only financial power of the religious authority that in each of these cases make other actors, in fact, at the forefront of the building of this mosque. Okay, so it's with these ideas that I, as Kerem suggested me, I tried to not in a very deep study, but a first study of the issue of the building of the mosque in Tirana. Here you have the opening ceremony of this mosque. I tried to look at what I will call the process of this. I will insist also on the building as, and the conception and the building as a process with, so like I did for the interwar, its various actors, spaces, places, materiality, symbols, and stakes. I found, for example, a paper by Oscar Verkijk on it's on the planning of a mosque in in the Netherlands, if I'm not wrong. This paper, interesting because the author is also paying attention to the process of the project, not only of the mosque as it is built, but also as the process of conception and building. And, but it's another kind of, because it's more a source, I have used, but also other sources, the paper written in the Journal of the Islamic Community of Albania by Dorian Demetia on the, you see the mosque of the Namazgah and the trajectory of its construction. Okay, so it's very important to have in mind that in Tirana, so the capital city of Albania, after the collapse of the communist regime, 3 big places of cult were built. First, the Catholic Cathedral in 2001, so it means 10 years after the collapse of the regime. Then 13 years later, an Orthodox cathedral, and I will say only in 2024, a big mosque. So this is very important. This is in the mind of many actors in Tirana and in Albania. By the way, you see also here first the style. The 2 cathedrals are built in, let's say, modern style, whereas the mosque is in a more traditional style. Okay, so now I will look with you at this process, which lasted 31 years to build a big mosque in Tirana. So, in fact, in his paper, Dorian Demetia says that it's 6 years, because, and it's interesting, he starts from 1938, when there was in the Journal of the Islamic Community, of the Albanian Islamic Community, a paper saying that, oh, there is this new mosque in Tirana, but we have to build a big mosque. So in fact, it takes this as the starting point. Some Turkish actors even said it's 100 years. Why? They take, in fact, the foundation of the Albanian state. So 1913, let's say 1213, as the starting point, as if already from that time, Tirana, but Tirana was not the capital city at that time, but Tirana was supposed to have a big mosque, and it was only in 2024 that they helped realize this. Dorian Demetia, in his paper, mentioned also the fact that already during the Italian occupation, there were requests from the Islamic official community to the occupation authorities for the building of such a mosque in 2 places, so whether in the Namazgah or in the new market. But of course, so in 1943, it's also the time when this occupation ended. Okay, so nothing happened, and then was the communist regime, and so it was not the time anymore to the building of mosques. Even mosques were and churches were destroyed or transformed in '67 when religion was forbidden. So, but it's already in '93 that the official Islamic community asked the municipality to build such a big mosque, and it was accepted at that time. And the community was in interaction with the Kuwaiti actors, and so there were Kuwait donors and entrepreneurs who even began the works of building a mosque in '94. I don't know why, but in fact these works were stopped, maybe also because some months later but it was only in '97, so I don't know why. Maybe they had no money, not enough money, I don't know. But so in '97 there were turmoils in Albania, and it was after the stabilization of the country that in 2001 there was a project, but not for a mosque. So in this very place of the Namazgah, a project of a park. In fact, the municipality at that time was headed by Edi Rama. And so he didn't want, so he rejected a project of building a mosque, accepted that, so 10 years later, 10 years later, there was an alternative project, but this time of building a mosque, not in the Namazgah, but in another place in the center of the city. And as you can see, so it's here, and here the minaret. So an ultra-modern project of a mosque designed by Danish architects, and in fact with also a museum of the interreligious cohabitation, something like that. And yeah, but this and you have also the project. But this project was rejected by whom exactly, I don't know, probably also by the Islamic authorities, because it was too modern. So I heard that, I heard on different debates on internet that so it was very difficult to recognize a mosque in this project. I think that we can agree, but interesting. You have to know that Tirana is a place for architects, so there are new buildings that are incredible. And 2 years later, there was a new project that you can see behind, so the person who was prime minister at that time, Berisha, the head of the community, and I think maybe it was the Basha, the head of the municipality, with a much more traditional design, which was, I think, maybe already the design of the new mosque that we have. But because of the political changes, Edi Rama came back to power, and or came to power, I don't remember, and as a prime minister, he in fact signed a new agreement with the Islamic community, with a new project, and also with a project which needed the expropriation of a family, of the land of a family. So it's not only on the land of the Namazgah, which Namazgah, it means the place, it's the place for the prayers during the Ramadan, for example, for big feasts. And so it was a land of the Islamic community, but it was not enough to build. So very often there are also this problem of land properties. Then in 2015, in May, there was the foundation ceremony with Erdogan and the president of Albania, Bujar Nishani, the chief of the Albanian Islamic community, Bruçaj, and the head of the Diyanet, Görmez, and with also the office of Khasa architecture. But then there were these problems between the Erdogan and the Gülen, the Gülen movement, and the works were stopped for 2 years, minimum for 2 years, because Rama didn't accept to comment on dit, to expel some Gülenists from Albania to Turkey. And so they were, but you see that, so you see that here I'm insisting very much on the Albanian side. But I think that it is important, it would be important also to put more into the picture let's say the Turkish actors. They are in the pictures, you see. But the fact is that politically, religiously, etc., the Albanian actors are maybe weaker, but they have a marge de manœuvre. And so it took several years in order, I think that it was in fact in 2021 that there was someone expelled from Albania, and that so you see that the political economic agreement was signed at that time, I think because there was this thing, and I think that it was only in 2023 that the college Mehmet Akif Ersoy was closed down, it was so already 2022, because Turkey also restored the old mosque of Tirana. Erdogan came for this, but there were again negotiations in order to make Rama accept also the closing down of the college. And it was only the year after that it happened. And that's why also the works of the construction of the mosque could continue. But, at the very end, there was, so just a few days before the inauguration ceremony, there was this polemics with the nomination of a Turkish imam for the mosque. And then the reactions were so important in Albania, but maybe some Albanian actors in the Islamic community or in the government accepted things, so there was maybe a pazarlık, but the fact is that for maybe the pazarlık was about the fact that the head of the Islamic community could not attend the ceremony. So there was here I think it's the Mufti of Tirana, but the head of the community was not present. So if we try now to sum up how to understand this complex and entangled process. So it's for the Orient Institute. So actors here along this very, very long process, we have the Islamic official community, but also within. So also for example, the main opponents, because there were very a few months before the inauguration, new elections for the head of the community, and the opponent of the head was re-elected, by the way, in fact, is saying that the head is a Gulenist, and so the other saying, no, I'm not, I have no problem with Turkey, etc. So, and the mosque is also, and the project of the mosque is also in the middle of their of the tensions between both. But also there are other people within the community, so the project was debated within the community, which is difficult to grasp, because very often they have an official discourse that doesn't show the different opinions. There are, of course, external religious actors, so like the Diyanet, but also there were these actors of Kuwait at the beginning, external entrepreneurs and architects. I was asking, for example, this morning to Kerem, but on the Turkish side, do we know exactly, for example, if Komash, so the building enterprise, is not sometimes saying to the head of the Diyanet or to the Turkish government, we want to have a new work, building work in this country or that country because they have an interest, etc. So we don't know exactly. There can be, so here we have also the Kruya family because of the land issue. We have the believers. But what is very interesting is that the analysis of this process also reveals tensions between different actors. For example, the Islamic community and other religious communities. So they argue that they have to be equal, and also the issue of harmony is very important. Then we have political tensions. For example, the conflict between Rama and Berisha. After the inauguration, Berisha said, I was at the beginning of the project. Rama didn't want; he wanted a park. So he's not the main person for this project, etc. And also at the level of the municipality is also very important. At the beginning there were the Albanian-Kuwait networks, and then the Albanian-Turkish friendship or cooperation, because very often the project is linked to agreements that are signed at the economic level, but also because of security questions, military agreements. For example, recently Turkey furnished drones to Albania. So Turkey is a regional power, definitely. I think it's and it intervenes in this project as a regional power. Of course, the conflict between Erdogan and Gulen is very important, with the Albanian government in the middle. And also between, I finished, between Erdogan and the Islamic community. And so now the two last points. In the debates, of course, the existence of the mosque was debated, even if, as I said, with the time, the project was more and more legitimate because of the existence of the two big churches. The issue of the place in the center of the city, and what is interesting is that ecology and urbanism is very often invoked in these debates. So what about the green in the center of the city if we build such big buildings? The style is also debated, so modern, traditional, but also, for example, the style of the new mosque, it can be described as Balkan style, it can be described as an Ottoman style, but it can be described as an Albanian style, or at least an Ottoman style with Albanian elements. Why? Because it's the style of the Blue Mosque, of the Sultan Ahmed Jamisi, and the architect of the Blue Mosque was from Elbasan. So, so it's supposedly Albanian. So it's so techniques here again, as in the interwar, techniques of constructions and materials are put forward. For example, even if the style of the mosque is, let's say, traditional, they said, yes, but the building techniques are very modern. And also, financing timing is very important. Functions, here it's for the question that we had this morning about the couliers, because in fact the project includes not only a mosque, so there are several étages, several cut and floors, and downstairs there are conference rooms, very modern conference rooms, or a library, or even normally they want to open a museum again for the religious coexistence in Albania or in the Balkans. So it's conceived as also beyond a place of worship and beyond a mosque, and so in the debate, these other functions are very important in making the project also adopted. But also we saw that the issue of the leadership was very important, at least at the end, but it can be important also in the future, and the leadership and administration. So because I think that there is an association or a kind of foundation was created in order to administrate the, so is it, so for also for the, only for the financial aspects or also for the religious aspects, so it's not clear yet, and maybe it can also evolve. So this is really also one of the points. So to conclude, as I already said, I think that with this presentation, I tried to show that okay, Turkey is one of the main actors in the end in the foundation of this mosque, but it is not the only actors. And even Turkey, what does it mean? It's different Turkish actors, and yeah. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nathalie Clayer. We are running a bit late, but we have a few minutes for questions, comments from Christoph.
Thank you. A very short question. Catholic cathedral, Orthodox cathedral, Islamic mosque. As far as I know, the Bektashis are a religious community of their own. Do they have similar plans for something really big, large in Tirana?
They already built, also I should have shown also this, a big building called Odeon, which was not something traditional in Bektashi Tekke. So they have, the only difference is that it's not in the center of the city. It's at the outskirts, but otherwise they have built such important building. And I don't know if you heard, but and it's also political because it's Edi Rama who made a declaration in the States late autumn, saying that he wants to transform to make of the Bektashis or Bektashi headquarters in Tirana, Vatican. So it's also politically and...
Hi, Elif Bejan. I was your PhD student. So I have a question. I was wondering about the frequency of use during the interwar period of the 3 mosques that you shown. Do you know if it had an official use as well, since it was there to legitimize also nation state or the king? And maybe a follow-up question regarding that, because...
Excuse me, can you repeat the beginning of the question?
The frequency of use, like, how many people, I mean, was it active, the mosques that were built, and did they serve any national or official cause? And Kerem said in the introduction of the workshop, he talked about sound of mosques. So I wonder if the new mosque has, what is it, Ezan, is it loud, or is there any, regulations in regards to that, compared to Turkey, for example, where there is none?
So definitely there were, for the national feast, there were things organized, and in Durres, there was also in Shkodër a very large mosque built, and with a capacity of several thousand of people already at that time. So it's and for the sound, I think it's a very good question, but I don't know. I don't know. But I think that we have to look at this, because it's also part of the presence in the space. So in the soundscape. So I think it's very important.
Hi.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much. It is quite... Erdős from London Metropolitan. I just would like to ask one question regarding one particular word in your presentation, and I would like to ask a futuristic question. This is not maybe on your expertise. You mentioned about the military cooperation, Albania and Turkey. I mean, all of these mosques, soft power issues, so on and so forth, based on one particular aim, to influence the state and the societies, right? And what we're going to see that, okay, I mean, the religion, politics, international relations is okay, but at the same time, there's a realism on the other hand. And what we know that, okay, Turkey is very advanced level about drone, but on the other hand, we can't manage to make the engine of Khan. We are very much based on Eurofighters, so on and so forth. And it seems that in the future, most of the Balkan countries found themselves in a stuck position between Western Europe's and Turkey, who is drone or who is military equipment is going to be best for us or not. Do you think all of these long soft power issues have a positive or negative impact on the decision makers in the very near future about this militarization, or these political actors in Albania mostly choose their pragmatic options and go for the best? This is maybe the relation between soft power and then the decision making.
I should not have mentioned drones.
No, you said the drone.
I said no.
And and in your presentation, I saw the military.
No, because I thought that so it was clear that each time that Erdogan is coming for the inauguration of the mosque, of the opening after restoration, or the inauguration of the beginning of the works, at each time I have the impression that he's signing something or doing so. So it's what will be in the future, I don't know. But here we are in a phase of, or we were, and for Albania it was such a long, for this mosque, such a long process. Also because of the problem in Turkey in Turkey and Albania between Erdogan and the Gülenists also. Because at the beginning, the works were planned for 3 years maybe, So in the end, it lasted 10 years. So I have the impression that so both coincides, but it doesn't mean that they will coincide, that every time there will be such a coincidence. Because there will be, the big mosque is built, maybe they will build other big mosques in other places in Albania, but I don't know. So it's pragmatic more, I would say.
Right. We have one more question from our chat. Our colleague Ozan Aslan is asking about the Bektashi Vatican, whether you can talk a bit about more, because he also says that there are kind of big debates about this, not only in the Bektashi community in Albania, but also in Turkey. Apparently, it's something which is being talked about because it has an impact, of course, of the Bektashi Alevi communities in Turkey today. So Ozan Bey asks you to comment on this. And maybe from me, a small final point. It's interesting the fact that it has been such a long process in this construction of the mosque is, in a way, makes it a great test case, because you know, the discussions about mosque production start at a time when both in Albania and Turkey you have differential democracies, but you have kind of political regimes which are more or less kind of democratic polities. And then it goes through a process at the end of which you have two strong men, two big political figures who've been there from the very beginning, ultimately opening the mosque, and that's it, and that's the end of the story. So what does this story of the Tirana Mosque tell us about transition, democracy, and so on in this larger kind of Balkan Turkey space?
I think I will begin with the last question. I think he tells us things, except that the process, even with Rama and Erdogan, lasted 10 years. So it was not so easy. Even or two men who became very strong. So even in this case, it's not so easy. So we have to look very precisely at these fine temporalities in order to understand how even strong men are not mastering all, because there are entanglements that it's not only the relation between Rama and Erdogan, it's also the relation with Erdogan and the Lebanese, and maybe also other actors, political and non-political actors in Turkey, and the same so it's because there is also, you know, the issue of the expropriation of land. So the state had to pay. So it's also a process. It's less important, but it's part of the process. So it's and now to come back to the Bektashi issue. Yes, I can imagine that it is discussed also in Turkey, even if the Bektashi authorities in Tirana have no real authority in Turkey. So their authority have extend to so the Albanian territory, a bit of Kosovo and Macedonia, even not all the Bektashis in Macedonia. So, and I'm not sure that this project also will concretize because it's very political, because you know, the Vatican, the Catholic Vatican is something which has a long story, and the idea of a Vatican, of an extraterritoriality for the a Sufi group, even if it, and Christophe, you are right, it became in Albania a religious community, independent. So I'm not sure that that it will concretize, but I don't know. So I think it's more political than it's for Rama. Maybe it was a way to say Albania is important because we have a religious group which is is a center, world center, because it's called the World Center. It's called the World Center, but it's not really. But by the way, so when I arrived yesterday at the airport of Istanbul, so they announced that it was the meeting point of the world. Meeting point of the world. So.
Yes. Thank you so much, Nathalie Clayer. Thank you very much, Nathalie. And now we're going to continue this discussion with a different angle, of course, and with today's second speaker, Professor Rebecca Bryant. Professor Rebecca Bryant is, is Professor of Cultural Anthropology at the University of Utrecht. She studies forced migration, borders, unrecognized states, issues of sovereignty. And when you hear these terms, you know, there's basically one country which comes to mind, of course, Cyprus, Northern Cyprus. And this is, of course, the main case study through which she discussed these issues for decades and made it relevant for a much larger debate than just the regional debate on Cyprus. She's a prolific thinker and writer, and actually her publications are definitely too many to cite here. So I'll just cite the ones which were particularly important for me personally when I first started to learn about the Cyprus conflict, and these were the books which guided me into this very long-standing process. The Past in Pieces, Belonging in New Cyprus, 2012, Cyprus and the Politics of Memory, edited together with Yanis Papadakis, Sovereignty Suspended, Building the So-Called State in 2020, The Everyday Lives of Sovereignty, Political Imagination Beyond the State, edited together with Madeleine Reeves in 2021, and a book which I haven't read yet, but which is probably the most alluring, The Anthropology of the Future, authored with Daniel M. Knight. Professor Bryant is also the holder of the ERC Advanced Grant Infrastructural Imperialism, Global Big Brothers and Geopolitical Futures. And I think part of her title today comes from this research project. Her lecture is entitled From Paternal to Fraternal Domination, Global Big Brothers and Infrastructural Imperialism. Dear Rebecca, the floor is yours. But we also need the PowerPoints. Our colleagues from... Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Great. You hear me okay? All right, great. Thanks a lot to Kerem and Christophe for inviting me. This has been really a great workshop so far. And after the very detailed case study that we just heard, my talk is going to really zoom out a lot. which will probably make the IR colleagues in the room happy, but don't be too happy because it's all a smoke screen, because I'm actually an anthropologist, so I think about these things from the ground up. But what I am going to be talking about this project that it has, well, it's in progress at the moment. I'm not even going to talk about the results of the project yet, because it's really the beginning of it still. But what I'm going to do is try to, well, give something of a framework to the discussion today. I mean, or rather, to talk about what I see and what the project sees, let's say, as the bigger picture, one that could be broadly framed as a matter of everyday geopolitics, and particularly in the project that I'll be explaining, we look at foreign-funded mega projects, primarily mega projects, as geopolitical sites. And what I mean by that is sites where, particularly the recipients of the project, but also the funders of the project, see them as being projects of geopolitical significance, having some kind of geopolitical significance, and through that begin to understand, have certain kinds of geopolitical imaginaries that are also wrapped in understandings of geopolitical futures, and where those geopolitical imaginaries also reshape on the ground political relationships, or rather relationships of power, let's say, political subjectivities, and so on. So, yeah, here we go. Let's see. But before I get to this bigger picture, I want to start with how I began thinking about this. And as Kerem said, I've worked for a long time on Cyprus. Not only, I've also done research elsewhere, including in Turkey, but my primary research site has been Cyprus for a very long time. And Cyprus, as I'm sure all of you here know, is a particular case where that's often discussed, well, the north of the island is often discussed as under Turkish occupation. I would call it a much more ambiguous domination, but it is one where the Turkish state plays a very large role. And I'm going to just start with a very recent incident that happened in early April, so a couple of months ago. There was an incident where a young girl, 15-year-old girl, tried to enter a school with a headscarf. And the administration of the school wouldn't allow her in. And the current government in North Cyprus is not at all religious, but is very keen to use the resources that the AKP can provide, and so essentially plays up to the AKP whenever it can. And so they essentially changed the regulations so that the girl could go into the classroom. This resulted in large-scale protests, and you can see it says here, if likely is silenced, thank you, then freedom will cry, basically. So, I mean, the Turkish Cypriot community is very secular, fundamentally secular, we could say, and because of, and also very Kemalist, historically speaking, and in the present as well. And so this was a real kind of touchstone. I mean, it set off this series of protests that went on for a couple of weeks until the moment when, oh, sorry, I'll show that to you in a minute. Until the moment when this other incident happened, which was the inauguration of a külliye. All right. Now, this külliye had been under construction for about 5 years now, I think it is. And it includes, I'll show you in a minute, it includes a presidential palace, I guess, a parliament, a new Supreme Court, and a millet bahçesi, the sort of national park. how much that's going to be open to the public is still not clear. And there have been some protests against this külliye when Erdogan first came to the island and announced that he was going to build it. Okay, but those protests had more or less stopped when construction began. Now, the paradox here was that when this külliye was announced, that what Erdogan said in announcing it was that it was intended basically to show the world that this was a real state, okay, that this unrecognized state was a real state. Now, of course, not recognizing the complete irony of, another state giving, gifting this thing to the TRNC in order to show its stateness. I mean, it's very interesting that that hasn't somehow been noticed by anyone in the Turkish government, but it hadn't been. So what I'm trying to point out is that although this protest was against what people saw as the Islamization of North Cyprus, the increasing attempt by the Turkish government to Islamize the north, to make people more religious, it was not only that, okay, because it came on the back of a lot of other construction projects that were not only of a religious nature, but that have changed the landscape entirely. Now, there have been several cases of large-scale mosques being built. This is the one that Kerem showed you in the morning. It's actually really in a peculiar place on the edge of a highway in this dusty kind of industrial area. It's next to a university, but it's still in a very strange location. This is actually a private-funded mosque. It was built by the owner of Near East University, essentially as a way of sort of brown-nosing the Turkish government, basically saying, hey, I'm more religious than you are. This is the mosque that's still being built as part of the külliye. That's just outside the center of the city. But these are not the only things. Oh, and this is the other part of the külliye. This is the large presidential palace and so on. And as someone said this morning, I can't remember who it was, you can't really understand the scale of it from a picture. It's a little bit hard, but it's very, very big. Okay. But these are other things that have been built. Okay, that's the mosque again, but this is, these are big hotels and so on. I mean, there have been all sorts of large-scale construction projects that have changed the landscape of North Cyprus over the past 10 to 15 years, some of which have been sponsored by the Turkish government, some of which have been encouraged by the Turkish government and often constructed by companies that are very close to the Turkish government, right? So, for example, there's this area called Bafra. It's a tourism center, and quite a few of the projects there were built by companies close to the Turkish government. Here are just some. These are other construction projects, or here you can see sort of the transformation of Kyrenia, right? Over 20 years, yeah. And again, a lot of this construction has either taken place with the encouragement of the Turkish government, with the funding of the Turkish government, or, for example, construction seriously increased after the opening of this water pipeline to North Cyprus from Turkey in 2015. So, so that also kind of, triggered a lot of construction. At the same time, there are certain kinds of paradoxes here, like, for example, just recently, just a few days ago, the government in North Cyprus announced that they were going to build 32 new casinos, okay, and casino hotels, all right? So this is from a Turkish online paper, saying that the TRNC is becoming a gambling heaven, that these 32 but I mean, the irony here is that, again, this kind of construction is taking place with the encouragement of the Turkish government, as a kind of development plan, a development model, which, of course, in this kind of image is they're making fun of the fact that the irony of the fact that the AKP is encouraging casinos. So, what do I want to say in this talk? Okay, now I come to this. So this was the case I mean, this is one example of things that are going on in this case that I've been looking at for a very long time, where you can look at the mosques, you can look at this sort of resentment against, rebellion against what's perceived as, Islamization, but it also needs to be put within the larger context of these other developments that are happening, and so on the basis of this, I developed this big project, which is something that, as an anthropologist, we don't usually engage in these sorts of huge projects, because the project looks at Turkish-funded infrastructure projects in the Balkans, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, so across, Eurasia. But what I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes that I have, can you tell me when I have like 10 minutes left? Okay. Is why I see this as not peculiar to Turkey. It's not something that only Turkey is doing. Why I think that's important for thinking about what is happening within Turkey, and how I think that this helps us to rethink some issues around imperialism, which is something we were talking about this morning. So, again, this is the water project that I could have taken this slide out, but this is this big water project that I sort of began thinking with originally back in 2015, 2016, when I was first thinking about this project. But what I was really starting to think with was actually I mentioned at the beginning that I see this as sort of a project on everyday geopolitics, and the way that I've been looking at that sort of engages with what John Agnew calls civilizational geopolitics, and basically this is sort of the idea of these sorts of civilizational centers that people kind of map in their minds. But of course, the interesting thing about this is that while we often talk about Turkey's civilizational geopolitics, so the neo-Ottomanism label, right? Of course, it's not only the Turkish government that's doing this. You also see, for example, Alexander Dugin talking about very similar things. I mean, you also see representatives of the Chinese government talking about very similar things. So there's this circulation of a certain civilizational geopolitical rhetoric these days, and within that there are these attempts to build historical ties. Hence the neo-Ottoman rhetoric, or the idea that there are ties between, for example, Turkey and the Balkans, and a lot of that has been discussed from the infrastructural perspective through China's Belt and Road Initiative. So there's been a lot of literature. You can see a lot of literature on the Chinese, for example, this one, the Belt and Road, a Chinese world order, right? So we hear a lot of discussions of how the Chinese state is attempting to engage in this kind of civilization. I don't have it here. Well, there's some others. This kind of civilizational geopolitical rhetoric. Okay. But we also see how, of course, I mean, as I think many of you know, there's been an increase of attempts to use this by the Turkish state, not only in terms of things like mosque building, but, for example, the number of Turkish embassies, Turkish airlines, etc. So how this is these various kinds of projects have attempted to create different kinds of ties. You know, what I was mentioning earlier today, a kind of fictive kinship that's built around ethnic ties, religious ties, historical ties, but that's materialized in different ways through things like embassies, aid to Somalia, etc. I'm going to skip that. Now, in the title I mentioned from paternal to fraternal domination, and what I meant by that is that both the rhetoric around these kinds of investments, but also in the practices, things like what Laura was mentioning, you see this move that's being made by both the Turkish government and the Chinese government, to a certain extent. It's been made by the Russian government to talk about, to cast this sort of infrastructural development as a sort of brotherly cooperation rather than colonial exploitation in the paternalistic mode, right? So there's been an attempt to shift this discourse to talking about brotherhood, fraternity, right? Rather than paternalism, and it's been quite explicit. So, for example, in various speeches that you can find by the Turkish government and its representatives of Erdogan and so on, they say things like, "We know very well who exploited. We know what Africa went through in the past. We are ready to share our experience with our African brothers." Okay, and you also have had, these signs of seeing Turkey as an Afro-Eurasian country, right? This Year of Africa in 2005, and essentially building these kinds of associations that are. It's not entirely clear if they're really about Islam, if they're about historical ties, but it is this kind of fraternity that is being emphasized. So now, one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that there is this fraternity, right? Of course, is both the basis for this sort of largesse of the Turkish government, and also produced by it. Yes. So, I mean, largesse is a word that I use in this project because it's an interesting word, because it means both to give something, to a gift of this kind, but also it implies largeness. Yeah. And this is precisely what all these things are doing. So they're both about the relationship that's created through the gift, right? Referring to Marcel Mauss and all of that, yeah? So it's this gift giving, but also it's showing that you are sort of the big brother who's giving this gift. But the emphasis is on brotherliness, and here, I think what's one of the things that I find very interesting is Kerem had on his title about failures today, but didn't really go into the failure part. But I think that the failures are often as interesting as the successes in this regard, because there's also a small portion of the IR literature on Turkey that talks a bit about what they call the demonstrative effect, where what's important is not so much that you succeed, right, or that it actually occurs, but rather, so in other words, Turkey doesn't have to be perfect, right, but it can still be aspirational. It can still be a source of aspiration, right? So this is actually where I think you get the sort of big brother effect, right? So big brothers are not like fathers. They can make mistakes, okay? But you can still see them as people to look up to, people who are going to help you, guide you, etc. So there seems to be something of this nature that's going on here. So we've talked a bit about imperialism, right? And when I was writing this project, what I was trying to get at through this is how the materiality of these kinds of mega projects, mosques, but also other things, right, are actually creating certain facts on the ground that have that are both at the moment of their inception inherently geopolitical, but that also continue to have geopolitical repercussions in the future, and that they become these sorts of lasting effects of attempts to create the kind of civilizational centers through this infrastructural largesse. And so in thinking about this, of course, I've left the concept of imperialism rather open here, right? In other words, for me, this is a heuristic term that I use only to signal that there is a kind of reach, right? An attempt to do something through this kind of largesse, but I put a question mark around it, at the end of that. In other words, what is actually happening? And clearly something is happening, right? As we heard this morning, there are certain effects. Are these effects the intended effects? That is the question. And so, but it does seem that that in terms of this kind of civilizational geopolitics discourse, there is an effect that also is entering the realm of everyday life, as Laura was talking about. In other words, that that when you have a shift, for example, among Balkan youth, from potentially resenting such interventions in the past to actually desiring them, then this is a big shift and indication of some kind of, I don't want to call it success, but certainly a change. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that I've been seeing these projects as geopolitical sites, and one of the ways in which I've been seeing them that way is that I see them as becoming sites for kind of staging particular aspirations and hopeful orientations towards the future. And in this new world order that's supposed to be produced, because I mean, you'll notice that Erdogan and all of these other authoritarian leaders are constantly talking about the new multipolar world that needs to be created, right? So in that new world order, what I am trying to suggest is that this kind of fraternity is supposed to replace a paternalism, and it kind of euphemizes relations of domination and dependency as equal, historical, and familial. And so, as a form of soft power, you might say, but I've been trying to think about whether it's soft power or not. You might call it concrete power. I'm not sure. But as a form of soft power, concrete power, I'm not sure what to call it. Infrastructure, I would say, is a really important way these days to sort of assert greatness and the capacity for a modern future, even without conforming to prescriptive formula for democracy, security, economic growth, and so on. So in other words, I pointed out that, as we all know, I mean, the Turkish government has been very active in Africa, in a lot of countries in Africa, and a lot of these are countries where other powers have been reluctant to invest for reasons having to do with the state of democracy and so on. But that, of course, is not so important here. And one of the things that a lot of the projects, not the mosques so much, but a lot of the other projects, such as roads and railways and airports and kind of futuristic seafronts that you find in places like Batumi, you know, one of the things that they kind of signal is the aspirations that both the government that's providing this, in this case Turkey, and the client state share. So certain kind of aspirations for particular kinds of futures. Now, what I've been trying to work out is what kinds of terms might help us kind of break this down and understand it a bit better. And one term I've been playing with this is the idea of infrapower. So, as I mentioned before, if countries such as Turkey and China become, you know, big brothers helping their little brothers, then exploitation appears to be replaced by largesse, and relations of domination are cast in these terms of equality and fraternity. So you see this, for example, again, in a lot of the discourse of the Turkish government, things like Erdogan's meeting with Macky Sall, where he said, "We see the people of Africa as our brothers with whom we share a common fate. We approach their pain not with political, strategic, and interest-based goals, but completely humanely and conscientiously." Yeah. So, I mean, as I said at the beginning, one open question is, you know, when various kinds of foreign-funded infrastructures are built in places like Senegal, yeah, those foreign-funded infrastructures invariably are interpreted in particular ways, both by the people who fund them and the people who receive them. And those ways that they're interpreted invariably are sort of situated within these larger geopolitical frameworks, and so partake in what we could call everyday geopolitics, where the whole trajectory is one of, again, this idea of having a common fate and sort of building the future together. That's the sort of rhetoric. And so I think we can see the emergence of sort of imaginaries around infrastructures, particular kinds of imaginaries, where, I mean, this is Astana, yeah, which is, again, you know, a sort of futuristic city, we could say. In other words, it's designed to evoke a particular kind of modern or postmodern future. And so, you know, when you look at or when you live with this kind of infrastructure, and Astana was built almost entirely by Turkish firms, by the way. So, I mean, a lot of the construction, almost all of the construction was by Turkish companies. So, I mean, basically the idea is, well, you know, we are the future of the future. So we are as modern as, perhaps more modern than the West. And so again, this is again referring to Africa, but I mean, you know, Erdogan has taken a lot of trips to Africa as president. and you know, again, the idea that there's a rejection of a Western teleology, right? The idea that somehow the West is the endpoint of progress, right? You know, there's a rejection of that, and the idea that that in itself, seeing the West as the endpoint of progress, is Orientalist, or it's you know, it's racist and it's paternalistic. And then the other concept I've been playing with is the idea of infrasubjectivities, that there's a certain, I mean, going back to what I just said about you know, the idea that the West is the endpoint of our history. If you take that out of the picture, right, and along with its assumptions of political and economic liberalization, which I think many of us see now as pretty much dead. I mean, these days, that doesn't seem, I mean, what's happening in various countries that we are witnessing, like the U.S., that we're witnessing tells us that the assumption of political liberalization and economic liberalization is more or less dead. So, so if we assume that, then you know, we need another language beyond that. So this has left me with a few questions that I think are relevant to the discussion here. So, you know, what are the effects of infrastructural largesse on everyday life? And again, we've mostly been talking about mosques, but one of the things I've tried to point out is that I believe mosque building has to be situated in this larger picture. You know? And how does this kind of infrastructural largesse change the political landscape in the various states where it's being constructed? How does it change perceptions and imaginations of political possibilities? So again, thinking about the larger geopolitical questions, you know, I think we can see how there are differing imaginations of what those political possibilities can be. So I have a whole other section, but I'm not sure that I want to go into this other section because it's going to take me on another. Give me 1 second. Okay, all right. Well, just 1 second. Well, I'll just talk about one other aspect, which is something that again really applies also to the mosques. I think it's a question that is relevant to the building of these large mosques. You know, what is the role of spectacle, right? What is spectacle doing? And of course, we all know that with a lot of these mega projects funded by the Turkish government, they're all surrounded by a discourse of the greatness of Turkey, right? And a lot of them have these kinds of labels attached to them, like the project of the century, right? That was the one given to this water project. Or Kanal Istanbul is the crazy project, right? Çılgın project. So, so clearly, there's a spectacle is actually accomplishing something, yeah. And I believe that when thinking about the mosques as well, it's important to think with their size, their placement, and what they're doing there. So, I mean, we all know that not just with these mega mosques, but also with mosques, historically speaking, they've been cited in particular ways, right? And historically also mosques and churches and other religious buildings have, you know, been, well, when they are imperial constructions, they are quite large. What's interesting with the kind of mega mosques that are being built by Turkey in, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan, the Balkans, and so on, is that they are like little pieces of empire put there, yeah? So, because, I mean, those kinds of large mosques would ordinarily be in the imperial center and not in these kinds of peripheral places, but they become like small pieces of empire. Replicas, let's say, and that's another issue, I think, that is interesting to explore, like what is the role of replica? I don't know if you saw the original plans for Kanal Istanbul, but the original plans, which have since been taken offline, included a whole set of replicas of palaces from Western Europe, a huge Chinese pagoda and things like this. And I find the use of replicas very interesting, and it's something that I haven't really been able to solve as a problem. Like, why are replicas so popular? What does the replica do? But it does seem to have something as well to do with spectacle. But again, spectacle, of course, is about kind of propelling oneself into a different hierarchical relationship or position in relation to other states. So there's, you know, clearly this attempt to show that, well, the greatness of Turkey in this case. And you see it in things like the presidential palace. But also, again, coming back to this example of Astana, a lot of these mega projects are particularly oriented towards the future, or they're oriented towards signaling particular futures, right? And this is also, yeah, an important aspect of the project, to think about what kinds of futures are being signaled, and through being signaled in this way, being built. And what is the effect of that as a form of imagination? Yeah, so this is how we're trying to see these mega projects as imaginaries. Okay, yeah, I think, because I could go on about this for some time, but I think I'm going to stop here so that we have still half an hour for discussion. Yeah, okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, very much for your amazing presentation. We won't have half an hour, we have a bit less than that. But
yeah, we were supposed to finish at 4:30.
Sorry?
Were we supposed to finish at 4:30?
Yes, exactly, but we have another 15 minutes to have the discussion, and we have already many questions, so maybe we can just, I don't know who was first. First you, and then Christian, and then...
Thank you. I have two questions, short ones. The first one is everyday geopolitics. Can you expand more and define what do you mean by everyday, if it includes sociabilities as well in these landscapes between people, whether they are Turkish or not? And the second question is, your presentation, and especially the bits on Africa, made me think of a colleague, Gabriel Langer, who works on the Gülen movement in Africa, and I was wondering if you have any information on if there is this conflict that Erdogan started there as he did in Albania, for example, to maybe take over that influence in infrastructure? Thank you.
Do you mind if I go ahead and answer them one by one? Yeah. Oops. So by everyday geopolitics, there is a small literature in IR and also in anthropology. So this is where they kind of meet. That talks about everyday geopolitics. And actually, I'm in the process of writing a book about, well, it's about everyday geopolitics, but it's called Geopolitical Intensities. I'm writing it with a colleague of mine that looks at how we can see the effects of everyday geopolitics, or rather how we can study the effects of geopolitics in everyday life. But basically what we tend to mean by that is how on the ground people make decisions about their lives, which can include, you know, issues of sociality and so on, based on geopolitical calculations, imaginaries, etc. I mean, I'll give an example from my own, you know, fieldwork in North Cyprus. There's a when the island was divided, there were properties left on either side. There's a whole property dispute in the island, and a lot of Turkish historically Turkish properties are around Nicosia, and there are other places that were primarily Greek Cypriot properties, and in some of those places, like Güzelyurt or Morfu, this area in the west of the island, there's always been speculation that in the future, with some kind of resolution of the island's division, that area might be given back. So the idea would be, if there's a federation, that the north would have to shrink, and then that area could be given back. And so for quite some time now, people from the Güzelyurt or Morfu region have been burying their dead in Nicosia. Yeah? So you could see this as a sort of everyday geopolitical calculation, right? The idea that eventually, so I mean, you're just burying your parent, let's say, but you don't want to bury your parent in a space that might eventually be in a decade or two be given to the Greek Cypriot side. Yeah, so people make these kinds of calculations in their everyday lives. And in the book that I'm writing, we're talking about geopolitical intensities. In other words, where there are places and times where people more intensely calculate on the basis of geopolitics, where they more intensely weigh, these kinds of geopolitical elements in their everyday lives, in deciding, I don't know, where to build a house, or where to send your child to school, or all sorts of things that could be affected by these larger geopolitical forces and issues. Yeah. Sorry, what was your second question again? I forgot. Oh, the Gulen movement. Yeah, I can't really say anything about the Gulen movement. I mean, because I gave a bunch of examples from Africa. It's true, because I was, as I was developing the project, I was looking a lot at these African examples and thinking about how to include them, but ultimately didn't. I decided to stick to the Eurasian cases. But I mean, clearly there's been an attempt to replace the Gulen movement in these areas that, by all the reports I've read, hasn't been very successful. I mean, like, the schools are not considered to be as good and so on. But I don't want to try to say more than that.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have a question regarding the fraternal rather than paternal approach, which sounds very interesting to me, and this framing of, as you put it, Turkey as an Afro-Eurasian country. Is this actually a quote, because you put it in quotation marks? Okay, wow. So it's a long or short way probably from Turkey with a European perspective to Turkey being a Afro-Eurasian country. So I do understand it correctly that the framing is Turkey is somehow part of the global South and therefore more of a fraternal partner to these African countries and does a different approach. And this sounds a bit similar to China, how China is approaching them also to me. And the normal approach we would have from the West when looking at China, for example, is that this is only a smokescreen because this is actually a disguise for real colonial exploitation because China is leaving the countries highly indebted, for example. How does it look like with Turkey? Who's paying for these projects, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, I mean, actually the whole background to the project is the idea that China is not the only one doing this, that this is a very common approach, especially amongst countries that see themselves as not having been colonized themselves, right? And not having been colonizers in the Western sense, in this exploitative sense. Yeah? So there's, but in terms of yes, I mean, China is usually viewed as a country that's using, you know, debt as a way of exploiting the areas that it's going into. With the Turkish case, it's very interesting because obviously Turkey doesn't have the economic power that China has. Okay, but what has happened in many cases is that, okay, the Turkish government will fund certain things. For example, it funds a lot of schools, hospitals, even road construction. Some of this may be, you know, public-private partnerships. But on the back of those things that are funded, right, then, or mosques obviously, but on the back of those things that are funded, then there are agreements that are made with the local governments for Turkish companies to get certain tenders, right? So there's this kind of, I mean, obviously construction has been a big motor of the Turkish economy for the past 20 years, yeah? Both internally, so it's a domestic issue thing, and but it's also external. The other way that they've been doing this, and this comes back to Erdi's question earlier, is that there is through what we might call destruction capitalism, right? So, for example, giving military aid and or, you know, actually aiding militarily, going in, like in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, yeah, where Turkey aided Azerbaijan in winning the war. The very first thing that happened after that was that the Turkish government signed an agreement with the Azerbaijani government to get tenders for Turkish companies to reconstruct Karabakh. Yeah. What also has happened with Ukraine, you know, Turkey has tried to be a broker there, but you know, that role, along with, of course, providing drones and other things, you know, but that role has also led to an agreement that Erdogan made when he went to Ukraine a couple of years ago, that he signed with Zelensky for Turkish companies to have a role in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Yeah. So, I mean, there are different ways in which this is happening, but it mostly has to do with a certain amount of investment on the part of the Turkish government, and then on the back of that, you know, securing tenders for AKP affiliated Turkish construction companies, then to be part of, let's say, the reconstruction of certain places, or you know, to have an advantage when, let's say, a highway is going to be built, a railway is going to be built, things like this. So, it's unlike in the case of China, where, you know, it's clearer because it's not an entirely capitalist country. Yeah, there's here you know, you have both actions on the part of the Turkish government, and also certain kinds of agreements that are made that secure those kinds of tenders for AKP-affiliated, you know, construction companies that then, of course, play a role in turning the Turkish economy, right? So, I mean, a large part of the growth of the Turkish economy over the past 20 years has been based on construction.
Thank you. Likewise, previous Rebecca Bryant's project is marvelous. I think you are like, this is a kind of a comment and question. You had like 3 research questions, and I think you need one more about the global political IR perspective, based on IR perspective, because what I know that, for example, all of these big projects, Turkey's reconstruction to Mogadishu, opened the way Turkey to establish another peace table between Somalia and Ethiopia. Via this table, it's been competing with UAE for the Red Sea, and also involving the Eastern Mediterranean rare elements competition. Support, and there is an angle. And the same thing also valid for the Cyprus. This casinos is not only for the support the pro-AKPs, but also the upcoming election, right? And in September, late September, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So what would be the global desire of a kind of an authoritarian, like quite addicted to build big giant stuff? What would be the global desire? Because okay, Somalia is fine, East Mediterranean is fine, these are like the hinterlands of Turkey, but why in Brazil, why in, I don't know, in Cuba or in anywhere Turkey couldn't manage to involve the political the games over there? So what would be the differences? Thank you so much.
Okay. Do you want to ask me? Okay, all right. So if I understand your question correctly, all right, I started out talking about multipolarity, right? And as far as I can see, the bigger picture, right, has to do with what we could call, in, I don't know, bigger terms, the decline of the West, right? And certainly the decline of a unipolar system, yeah? So as far as I'm concerned, that's the bigger picture. The question for me there is, what kind of power undergirds multipolarity? What kind of power undergirds multipolarity? What kind of power is this? I think that is a question for me, yeah? Is it authoritarian power? Yeah. Or is authoritarian power too small a term, right? So, it's still a question for me, but I think that there is, I think there's something to be gained by looking at the materiality of these attempts to extend power, okay? Even when they're not successful, even when they don't succeed in the way that one might intend them to, yeah? They have effects. So what are those effects? And there are clearly changes being produced. Yeah? But this doesn't entirely get to your question. But I think, in a way, it's maybe a matter of looking at it from a different kind of scale. I've been talking about it from this very sort of bird's eye view. But of course, my own way of looking at it is very much from the ground up. Yeah. So what I'm really interested in is, what are the effects of these geopolitical visions or imaginaries on the ground, and how is that changing politics on the ground? Yeah?
We're seriously running out of time, yeah. But I will allow 3 more, but let's collect them, and then you respond. So Christoph, Nathalie, and Chiara, and Esther.
Thank you so much for your presentation that very nicely connected the symbolic with the geopolitical. And I have 2 short symbolic questions on symbolism. Number 1, if one looks at the culias, there are 2 things I think that need to be shown. These are non-urban but outside urban structures, as they are generally. I think that's very important. And then if one looks at them once again, there's one thing that an Ottoman culias or other kind of culias, and the word is 19th century only, would be present. And it's, I think, lacking in all of them. And that is a mausoleum, a graveyard. It's so important that and this is a question that has something to do with the religiousness, this we never use the word spirituality today, I think with good reasons, but it has something to do with a kind of religiousness, and what you talked about as looking to the future. It's a future of immortality where the death is not even seen, and even in the name of Astana, that used to be Akmola, which used to be the name for a grave, this becomes, I think, a little bit present. So what do you do with that? That's the first question. And the second one is with regard to brotherhood. Fraternity, fraternal. Well, I'm old enough to have vivid recollection that this is a rhetoric of socialism. Where the Soviet Union was a brother. So is there any interference that you could think of, especially if it comes to Africa? Thank you.
In fact, my first question was about Astana, and it's related to what you said, because for me, this futurism has many things to do with the Soviet futurism. As this Astana looks like a Soviet Astana, no? Soviet with the big and so it's so at least there is maybe also a continuity. And another question is about, so would you apply infrastructural imperialism also to European powers or America? And if yes, is there a circulation? I understand perfectly that you compare more Turkey to China, etc., but not speaking about comparison, but about circulation. Is it not interesting also to look at circulations between so these Western and non-Western imperialisms?
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk, and 2 or 3 words stayed with me, and I'm keeping thinking about them. So one was this very, very good concept of largesse and all the, the circulations of gifts, and then what you said about this culture of replicas, and of course, all these giant structures made me think of this Turkish culture of collecting biblo, like in a middle class household or even lower middle class, and also you see it in miniature and so on. And as I'm myself an anthropologist working on objects, and I was just wondering if it could be interesting to change the focus, or the scale maybe, because you're dealing with all these huge structures, but if you could treat them as objects like biblos, and then you will see how these players, you speak about like political game or players, how much it's really a game of putting your biblo, somewhere else, as you explained, and I found that very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll have one more question, and then Rebecca will be able to answer all of these in a few minutes.
Yeah. Thank you very much again for this inspiring talk. When you mentioned geopolitical, everyday geopolitical, or so the intensity, I was thinking that in IR the reflection has been mostly on the South-South cooperation, which is actually what Turkey is also, especially TIKA, for instance. In interviews, they mention many times this as a South-South cooperation. Then the question is also if you plan to see the representation also of Turkey as part of this global South, because if we consider the amount of investment, not only the institutions, the number of institutions, especially in some countries in Africa you mentioned, of course this proximity and this South-South might also appear in some way not so, stick to reality. So thank you again, and just a few remarks on that.
Thank you. And the final question from me, but very brief. Is the difference between fraternal and paternal, the paternal embrace, only discursive? or is there a structural difference? Now you have 1 minute to answer all of them.
Okay. Oops. So I think I'll start with that last question, which also relates to something that Christoph said about brotherhood being present in the Soviet Union. So I think I don't think it's only discursive. I think it's also a matter of practice. Yeah. And again, sorry to keep referring back to Laura's talk this morning, but I thought it was very interesting because, you know, again, I mentioned also what she said about, you know, the practices being very Balkan. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a, I mean, basically there's a kind of use that you see on the ground of this discourse of, well, we understand each other because we have a similar culture. Yeah. Where, for example, kinship is very important. Yeah, unlike in the West, where I mean, there's often this perception that kinship is not so important. Yeah, so there's this. I mean, you know, obviously, if you think about it in Turkish, there's a real affective difference in the meanings of the father and a big brother. Yeah. I mean, it's a very present affective difference, yeah? And that seems to be what is being played on here, right? Where in the places where this discourse is being used, there's the perception at least, and I believe it's also to a certain extent a reality, that there are similar affective differences between the paternal, you know, the father figure, right, and the brother, yeah? And I think that's also where there is this difference between the idea of brotherhood here, this kind of idea of fraternity, and the idea of brotherhood in the Soviet Union. I mean, of course, fraternity is also supposed to be part of the modern Republican project, yeah? Liberty, equality, fraternity, right? So, I mean, it's not only in the Soviet Union, but that's a different kind of fraternity. It's almost a fraternity without a father, right? So it's the union, the union of brothers. But this, it clearly plays on this different affective resonance of the brother versus the father, and also the big brother in particular. That's why I put that in the. So again, like in the Republican discourse or in the discourses of the Soviet Union, there's this idea of equality among brothers. Yeah. Whereas this is actually not entirely equal. Yeah. So the Turkish state, China, and so on. There's this, the rhetoric is one, and also it seems to a certain extent the perception is one of being someone who can guide you. A big brother sort of perception. Well, I don't really have much time, so I'll pick one other thing, one other question here. Yeah, great idea about circulations between Western and non-Western imperialisms. I mean, that's certainly something that the project is going to build on. I mean, one of the things that we're going to do, I mean, we're looking empirically at Turkish infrastructural investments, but a lot of the project is also going to involve bringing in other scholars who've worked on more or less the same places, but looking at, for example, Chinese investment or historical Soviet investments and so on. So trying to compare how those infrastructural investments are perceived and looking at them through this lens of geopolitical sites. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that I could say, but I feel like I shouldn't try to. Maybe we can talk some more at dinner or something, or, you know. Because, I mean, South-South cooperation, seeing Turkey as part of the global South, yes, but I feel like that distinction is also starting to break down. So I would say yes and no, in the sense that it may not be as relevant a distinction in the near future. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Okay. Thanks a lot for your questions and comments.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. Thank you, Rebecca, for this wonderful talk and the discussion, and to Nathalie, to both of you, for these lectures in our online event in the cooperation of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft and the Orient Institute in Istanbul. Please also follow our websites, both of the Institute and the Gesellschaft, because there will be follow-ups to this conference. There will probably be podcasts. There will be a special section in the journal of the Südosteuropa-Gesellschaft, and we will hopefully continue to discuss these issues. So thank you very much. Thanks to our viewers online, and goodbye from Istanbul.